Okay, direction, ground centers, high sequence, high panels, high operation lengths and interference, operation location, pixelation, adaptation, and set travel. How we convert to the lines of grounds is a center communication converts the segment to high settings. In that lines of travel, we have to start to recognize, to see everything in information lines of set position. How we convert this settings, it's easy to see things, but now we have to see the perspective, how everything sees us. And that's the only way you can understand the brain convergence and set adaptation. This helps us to process how we really start connecting in settings. So that's where we're going to go through the operation cycle. You're going to see everything from outside, inside of your intelligence. And processing that positions, we get out of the equations how we look straightly at the center of everything, and we start to look at the outside, inside perspective. You could be creating the structure of locations. That's processing you through construct of your information panel, right? As you get in position, but you can create it from the set lines of inner space that projects everything in outer space, which is the Earth. That's where you get 15-minute grounds and set lines, so 15-minute lines of space. You got in that travels, right? So that's 15 hours in travel communication, and construct and design. Center lines of grounds in sequence, platitude positions, and 144 flux, so travel. Okay. Operation lines of travel, correlations calculus center, center operation lines of set travel, out communication lines of force, or just no time frame. So this helps us to really identify how we see the projections, how we see everything line set, location, square roots over screens, adaptation of flux, process that positional graph, and pixelation grounds. Because that's all it is TV receptors, or pixelation. And modifying that is all distortion of information. Astral projections, astral travels, astral connection lines and settings, all through set lines of graph of communication. Right? So you can see the clear, precise, right? But each pixel, okay, is the same color. Okay? All pixels are the same color. So you understand how a brain, the actual brain, sees everything from outside and inside of you. And that's the cluster. That's the confusion. That's the separation of the mind. You're separating yourself, not identifying yourself. You're confusing your anomalies. You're not understanding your set position of operation, how the brain converts everything, how it sees of everything outside and inside of you, all through travel, all through communication. Okay? Balance of everything, one signal, one ground, one operation lines of travel. So, let's just get into this. This is one color. Okay? How many graphs are set lines of travel in the schematics of this drawing? That's what you have to indicate through. Process that position of its brain convergence, brain adapters, charging mechanisms, solar generations, solar travel communications, solar interference, magnetic impulse, intellectual inner impulse, discharge, line condition setting. Set communications, how the brain sees everything, information setting, all times, all at once. In one frame, box frame of coloration. One frame coloration. Now it can see, right? So platitude exists, right? Seeing how fast it goes to acceleration of 50% of time frame. So that's one box right there. That's just one box right there. So all that, okay? So that's 12,000 channels in one frame. One color, one coloration, right? And then you basically put that all together, frame to position, 3 centers outline signals, and location lines of 2 over travel. Okay? Converts the system calculates and grounds, modified lines of time frequencies, time panels, time centers, echo, sonar, interference, line travel, communication, position, operation. Okay? So, starting with the cubical line grounds, process lines and location setting, the astral line condition of the astrologics. So that's, of course, centers, location, and defrag over fragmentation. That process, that calculation setting, is the brain convergence. Now understand that through adaptation lines, calculation ground lines, is inner line its calculation setting through a central cloud, an I cloud, or an E cloud. That process you in a position of operation is a cycle. So communicate ground centers, a set of void over lines, latitude, location setting, position of processing. Okay, so that indicates position on levels. The astrologics is the projection. Okay, that process calculation. So the I-line direction, right? Right at the bottom sequence, top lines of center location setting. Right, so we color that in red, which is already done. Okay, that's one box frame. Now, How our brain sees you, okay, is extremely fast in pixelation lines, placing lines of position. Okay, so that's converting between 24,000 channels per square, 24,000 channels per pi, or 24,000 channels per ground, all through one box frame, one coloration, one setting. One indicates setting of security. So that process indicates positions, balance according to calculation of ground lines of travel, directing ground position operation lines of 2 travels, 2 formations, 2 cycles, and 2 calculation of rejection. Okay? So how we see that setting is very powerful stuff. So we line the signals, and then we come into another distortion of information, which is your clutter, which is lines of blue. Now blue is a plasma line. That process occurs in setting, position, location, and fusion. Pattern operation lines of sequence. So we coordinate position lines outline signal, process line position lines of travel. So I'm just showing you exactly how the brain communicates with you and how it sees the outside of everything and inside you. All right, so projection over lines, color in the blue line. Okay, and then we go through window glass screens into high travels, translucent, transparent, or anything X-ray or radiation and grounds. It's that line sequence. So we can platitude red, we platitude blue, all right? So we central line communication setting, and we convert the system that blue blocks inside the center operation. We convert the operation line signals, center operation, center operation. Okay, there's the percentage. How the brain sees the percentage of 50%. Okay, so we covert the astrological line because it's defrag, the fragmentations to its longitude, latitude, streamlines of bandwidth. And the pixelated force center sets an algorithm, a process of communication setting and travel. So this is how you convert your system and communicate with the brain itself that identifies you in the mind. So this puts the percentage, for setting the sequence, of telecommunication and telewaving as set lines of travel. Okay? Let's see that as travel communications. All right. So how it communicates to echo and sonar is an offline spin, oscillator, and a pattern operation line embedding and rotation lines of setting and operation sequence. Platitude positions inside, outside of travel. Okay? Outside in, inside out. So it has I division lines of course centers, platitude information system, and pixelation graphs, overriding signals, and graph communication. Okay? Very powerful stuff. And longitude latitudes, what's a lattice of communication setting all through traction. Okay? I divisions of flux, I divisions of projection. Okay? And then we go through graph screens, central graph course centers, convergent system, and human resonance and travel communications. 2 convergent settings, 2 projection line settings, how the eye sees right and how the eye sees left, and how the eye sees left and how the eye sees right. Right? So we convert this system and we rotate the graph communication of setting. So the center line connection center, how the brain sees everything, is from the outside projection. And so it's a setting. Okay? So it's about understanding how to see 2 eye division lines and projection over a screen. Now with platitude, we change the operation line grounds, sets convergent system, all through set lines and set travel of communication. Okay? So the eye division line comes in a 4-box screen, 3 centers in volume, 3 outline centers, 4 set positions, and calculation setting. We process the center of our operation of center of U. That's the center of U, controlling everything of center of operation of flux in 144 setting. Okay? So it modifies the high centers of travel. Now this has a direct line length that patterns its operation signals into flux over enabled to default in line condition setting the process of indication. Okay? Now we indicate the graphs, we center line and lacing the lines. Okay? How the brain sees from outside in and inside out of everything that it sees, right? So that's how it sees you, right? But it sees you in distortion, it sees you in confusion, it sees you in emotion, it sees you in waves, it sees you in delta, it sees you in theta, it sees you in omega, it sees you in all formations, all timelines, all at once. Okay, waving screens, album screens, delta screens, anything information, any grounds. All right, so it platitudes its eye line division locations right over left. Now that has a direct line length that processes indication lines of arrows of indication, all through pi, all through generation. Now, and how the brain sets up its own setting of its own calculations and its own scepter of its receptor of its refraction. Now, getting into fractions over screen, the processor indicates us how we go through coloration lines of patterns. Put you in position lines of purple, Okay, face facades over screen. Process lines of purple, face facades, location, rotation. Process lines of purple, operation lines of sequence at line setting inside rotation. Okay? So it's very powerful how this is all set up in division. Okay? And this is how the brain sees everything from outside in. From the seconds, minutes, and hours, or hours, seconds, minutes that you're platitude in the set lines of operation. There's a central system that you extend the central core. The energetic core, the magnetic core, the galactic energy core, the central core, the communication core, the main core, operation line, calculation setting, the inner core, the outer spectrum of the line center, the processing system, the processing communication setting, how you see direct and redirect lines of provision. Okay? So it gets very complicated how you have to see the clarity of everything else. Okay? So platitude positions, operatives, and units, get them to see everything outside in, process the brain circuits. So it's like 1-3 graph, sets position of 1/2 of a third. Okay, then process lines in communication setting, 3/4 equals 7. Times centers is a set position of 12. 12 center in sequence, 12 centers of measure, 12 centers of scale. Sets position triangulation box, set position box over triangulation. Time frame, time calculations, time format, directing ground centers and platitude. Open up all brain convergence setting, get them to see outside in and inside spectrum. Okay, have fun. Okay, so you got 15 minutes to see everything in setting. Our brain sees everything of its own consciousness, its own awareness, which is everything else in perspective. Okay, it's all said and done. Okay, have fun. So 15 minutes on mark, travel to point line to graph, set position into 15,000 hours, travel. Calculate ground centers and set positions. 150,000 mark line settings, information bits, 50,000 units over square root. Okay? Have fun. As you're going through the brain convergence setting from outside everything in travel, this helps you to identify everything that's going in provision. This helps you to understand how to see the oscillogics in location setting into defrag and fragmentation of fractions. Fractions over fractals equals formations, 3 formation lines, F locations. So correlate to communication convergences of 2 centers, 1 setting, 1 operation, 1 screen, 1 interference, and direct lines of grounds. Okay, codification lines, foundations over form, and process and positions into programming, instant calculation. Directing online site that indicates ground centers in sequence, platitude percentage into 67%. Brain convergence line ground centers, balance line operation line core centers, CCTV, set core centers in ferment, echo, formation lines into formats, ferments over core and track convergence system, and deltas and rotation lines of setting and travel. So converting this setting to an operation cycle, how it generates the flames. Process indicates the setting, how you go through on-line setting. Process line connects the setting, your planetary alignments, 42 locations, 2 ground centers, delta heading and rotation on the ground lines of sequence, and platitude of operation setting and perspective. Perspective over 3 centers, 4 centers of travel, set lines of setting, 7 over screen. So you have to go in lines position of 3, position of 4 equals 7. 7 equals lines of 12, 12 lines of 24. Position lines over lines of 48 measured, scales communication lines of void, sets 0, 1 over travel, 2 over sector, 3 over vector, quadrant, sector, and line condition setting convergence, indirect lines of link, platitude operation line sequence, and solar system and travel. Okay? So converting at that level is knowing how to see the convergence system of the brain itself and landmass. It has a mapping line of its own operation set lines of travel and communication. So converting to that. It's much easier to identify the astral projection of its memory. As zeros gives you books of foundations that you go through that indicates you in the position of processing your line centers, how you're going to astral projection of line signals that put you in your transits over screen. So it's always in 50% over travel. Always starts at 50%, 0, 0 gravity, 144 flux. It's that calculation. Travels the point lines of graph, changes the flux lines, times centers times pi, indicates Y screen, directing lines of relays, operates lines of travel, indicate line grounds, set calculation setting. Now this is a process in that line communication, flux over travel, and direct lines of grounds. So that indicates all communicates to your schematics over screen adaptation of flux. Okay, process that position locations, how you set the routers and routers in the cloud location system in set calculation. Okay? So the brain is just coming to you through schematics of a primer, and its primer to its position lines in the setting, it's trying to get connected with you through echo and sonar, so it can understand how to communicate with you in signals, so it can understand your telepathy. Okay? But if the brain is confused and anomaly of its square roots, it won't understand its graph of screens. Each graph screen has to be one coloration line set in a one-time pattern. The set core set communicates the setting with graph and set location of central lines. Setting calculation grounds of 0, 1 over travel, 0 over 2, 2 over 1, 1 over flux, flux over A equals B, over lines of C, D equals lines of F. And that's how a brain communicates to your cycle, all through graph. And then the position line connection to the acid rejection has 4 lines of flights, 4 centers of scale, 5 centers of measure, fortitude, lights, and travels, and indicates the setting through assets that process you and your properties of set design. Okay? So this helps you to identify how the brain really sees everything in its perspective, guys. Okay, so you guys are going through that right now, filtering settings. The travels, you got 10 minutes left. Okay, so that's 10,000 hours in frame. That's 10 billion files per second. Latitude line centers, confirmation grounds in percentage, 80% lines, 24 centers into 20 over factor. Fractions over screen adaptations into sonar, echo flames, travels point lines, emanation core, calculate ground center sequence, question over mark. Okay? So that's how a brain converts to you, all through question. Question is line signaling location setting to one set line's operation, directing ground centers of flux, process of position, upside down, and rotation lines of grounds. Question here, question line connection setting, here's the percentage. Question above, question below. So you bring that together, you formulate the system, you come and calculate the setting of yin and yang. Alright, so it's always to adapt the center of center. Process that indicates a system. That's where you go into different angles of flux over travel. Now that helps you identify your 4 signatures, lines of arrows, 4 grounds of sequence, pattern lines, operation lines, and percentage over screen adaptation and travel. Okay? So there's always a center of you that never leaves the system. Okay? The mind line, imagination, chords, lines, and refractions over screen over fractions over position lines of pattern. Cyclic centers convert the system, all through traction, all through setting. Pac-Man over sequence. Okay, so directing ground centers, lines of travel, process and position, location, measure, and scale that indicates the system, all through calculation setting. So we got 42 I-line divisions in percentage over screen, flux over travel, flux over lines, flux over screen, flux over signal, flux over grounds, flux through operation, and 42 lines and 144 flux. Okay, so it's a constant, continuous flow that the brain converts to and outlines to its convergence. Setting brain adapters to the charge mix's time frame, process and indication lines of 3 wires of indication system. Now this is where we covert the system and its brainstem. Set cross centers, line operation lines of setting, and cloud lines of screen adaptation and process. Indicate ground centers, on sequence line communication, cloud line change, directing ground centers, cloud convergence, directing on-set lines of communication graph screens, 3 centers operation line signals, ground centers in position of flux, latitude operation lines of travel, and constellation alignments and travel communications, all through the brain. So the brain is always changing structure inside your system. Every time it looks, it's looking at a different scale. It's always looking at a different measure. It's never in the same position of location because it's constantly traveling in your mind, a percentage, and how you see it, that is 40 to 50% set lines of travel into 144 flux and balance communication, equal lines, astral projection of you, the astrology of you, and the astrologics of human travel. 3 880 lines of centers, platitude line operation lines of sequence, platitude locates the system, and solar square roots and travel calculation. So it's a constant continuous flow. So I keep going. But the brain self has to be in platitude positions in box frame of one center operation. One pattern, one core centers, one calculation screen location inhibitor. The auxiliaries and inputs and outputs are the audio line signals, but process communication, how you see your time capacitors, your body capacitors, and your flux capacitor location lines of travel. This helps you to identify your systems all through calculations. Okay? So this I'll show you. This is how your body sees 13. That's 13, right? This is how the brain sees 13. That's how the brain sees 13, okay? So it's true to understand how to modify the line setters of signals and location lines of grounds. It modifies the set positions, operational position, because it box frames the triangulation lines of grounds, okay? You have to box it in. So set lines to travel, directing positions, allocate time frames, box center 1, 2, and 3 set calculations. So that's 1 measure, 2 in scale, 3 in set calculations. That process lines of 2 over travel, sets lines of 3 over measure, 4 centers of sequence, 5 centers of scale. That process lines position 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. That codificates the setting. There's a codification grounds. Into encryption ground set line calculate setting. Embedding over 1 over 2 over 3. Platitude and operation lines signals. Sets defaults over lines. Enable a process of communication lines of grounds in sequence. So it's a constant continuous flow, how it sees everything of outside, inside projection. Okay? Very powerful how you see that through indications, guys. Alright? Okay. So as you go through the graph lines, how everything you see is line position. That's how you see a box, right? Through the body frame, location, action, projection. But how the brain sees has to be the same signal of rotation. It's got to see the same box. Okay? If it's not, it's seeing this. Confusion. There's a confusion right there. 3 lines of indication lines of wires override this sequence. Okay? Platitude operation line signals. So if you offline your signals, outscale, outside, out-center operation, you got to convert the system and balance of communication. Directing line signals, process and position lines of flux, and travel communication. Balance of indication lines of balance. That's how you indicate the position the brain sees and how the body sees all in alignment in 1 frame, 1 fraction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 calculation. Okay? Comes together and information lines of grounds. So that puts you at all levels how you indicate your system and all levels how you see the concept of awareness from everything outside in position from inside lines of travel. Okay? And that's what you have to come out of, is how to see everything from inside, out, and outside in travel communications. Never look at the center, okay? Always look at the perspective outside, inside you, okay? So that's what it is. That's how the brain sees everything. So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how to process that, understand the oscillogics, how it modifies the defrags, its fragmentation system, so it can enable itself through its own default. Now, the defaulting system puts it back in balance. That process and position of your cookies. Now, cookies are basically the application setting that processes you and positions how you process that through indications. Is not how to formally simulate in that location setting to your CPU. Operation lines of 3 centers of travel of indication setting. Wires of signature offline ground. See? There's no balance there. See? It hit a bump, right? So that's a transit. Offsetting off calculation, right? So you got to modify that and you got to overlay that. Okay, you can set a new customized setting, operationalize the sequence. Let's put platitude, indication setting, position. So the body has to be aligned. The brain has to be aligned with you in the mind that bounces cell and works of time frame. So we override the signals. We go through the bandwidth over streaming, over foot, over yards, over meters of scale of communications. Okay? So now it's inside, not outside of confusion. Right? So the brain adapts in 4 centers of signals and weighting graph and screen adaptation of flux. Direction of timelines, direction of forms, information lines of 3 centers of travel of communication. Now you can set security lines of panels, operation lines of screen and flux, expanding operation lines of travels, have indications and travel calculation. Okay? Balance position lines of setting, outside travel. So this helps you to really understand how you see yourself and knowing exactly how what's offline, off position, off calculation, roguing, everything is absolution. You guys have started to understand that too through your upgrades, your downloads, your uplinks, your downgraded systems, how to modify these things all through travel. So this helps you to see the brain from everything from outside in, and how the body sees everything from outside in, and how everything it sees from the inside out. So projections of here, projections of here, projections of here, projections of here, projections out from here, projections out from here, projections out from here, projections from inside, and 3 centers of travel. Okay? So, and it's all connected and all in one setting. Okay, process and positions, they're all in communications and communication cado, indirect lines of grounds in sequence. Platitude operates lines of settings, operates lines of travel, directing in, position lines of formation lines of ground sent in sequence. So that puts all communication system, all through travels, all through directions, in modification setting of flux. Okay, the top of the machine. Right? Very powerful stuff. And it's all connected to the eye, inside the eye itself. Okay? Inside the eye. Look at that. Look at that, guys. Look at that inside the eye itself. Absolutely incredible how you see things in moderation. Okay? So you look at the expansion, you look at the dimensions, you look at the layers. But if you get 12,000 TVs, okay, like this, a film strip, okay? Now, there's a strip of 3, right? But you put it all together, what is that process of position line setting, right? 3, 6, 9, and 12, okay? Now, you have to truly understand how a brain sees things. So there's a whole other understanding how the phone sees you now that you're implicated through. So you got 5 minutes now, set in sequence, okay, which is 5,000 channels, 5,000 panels, and 5,000 correlations into 5 million frames per second. That percentage is at 96, working on settings into 4 lines of rotation. Travis point lines is setting into 100 flux, and travel communications is setting 3/4, set lines of 7 over triangulation, 12 in signals, and 24 a scale of balance of communication. Okay? That's how the brain sees things. All through measure, all through scale, all through ruler, all through percentage, all through calculation. So when those film strips, we get the colors, lines, and grounds. Let's get into blue. Colored in blue, overlines in blue. Okay, settings. Okay, that's overlines of pi. That's time format, skipping over screen. Right? If we got red in the center, so security panels, process film strip, and design lines and film strip, and design line locations, but they're the same color. Right? Same color, guys. Same color. Right? That's what you have to modify through. So each color, that's why you have a rainbow. Okay, that rainbow indicates you in 12 flux, the 12 dimensions, and 12 rotations of film projector that you project inside your mind through imaginations. So let's go into the coordinates as travel. 1 flux, 2 flux, 3 flux, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 flux rotation, right? And each one, okay, is one string line and one color. Let's start off with blue. Let's start off with green. Okay, so open overlays, overrides, over travels, over directions, and custodian, over customization. Okay, so I'm crossing the rainbows, okay, of indications, right? But they're the same line signatures. Okay. Panels and screen locations. Okay. Now, if I add anything in the equation, it's confusing its lines of adaptation abilities. It gets in position how it sees its waves. See, quantum interference, right? See the quantum interference. If the quantum interference comes into motion line grounds, it overrides the signals of your 12 line rotations of your projection of design line. Okay, so now it's off line rotation. It's very confused now. It has no adaptation of balance. So your configuration setting is knowing how to go through triangulation box and how to communicate inside line centered locations inside conception and understand how you go inside. You're not going inside a TV. You're walking outside the TV, looking inside the intelligence. And that's how we modify it. That's how we see everything in projection. Once you modify it, then you understand how to see everything embedding that film projects itself outlined to the inside location of colors, lines, and pattern. Okay, and then you come to the light metaphors, and you get a true understanding how to set up your rainbows. Okay, one signature, one line, one rotation, one grounds, right? Mass and volume comes in position. What you really understand how to see all those at the actual projection yourself. Outside in that positions. Okay? So it's important you understand how to indicate that through flux, through time and body capacity. Okay, that process line position 3 signals. Travels in position, you work with 3, 3, and 4. 4 over 3, 3 over 4, 3 over 4. Okay, process line position time center sequence over 7. Travels point lines of 9. Travels point lines of 8. 12 line rotations. 12 indicates lines of travel. 24 flux. We calculate some 40 box frames. And that's how the brain sees everything of you outside, right? So it's trying to put the vision and cortex to you at the same vision that the body sees through its alignment, so it has a better balanced equilibrium in a coordination system and tractions. Okay, this helps you to codify your system, how you do things in encryption, because all the brain has to recognize what it's seeing in its eye division of its rotation. Okay, all through coloration, all through pattern, all through face recognition. Okay. So it's amazing how you see the form of the equations. How it's all put together. Right? And these are just line signals. I mean, let's just get in snowy graph interference of a TV. Okay, snowy graph interference, like this. Transits over lines of a pi. Okay, just black and white. Okay, so, you know, if you're seeing dark, well, that's what the brain's seeing. If you're not balanced inside, you're definitely not balanced outside. If you're not balanced outside, you're not balanced inside. So it puts you in positions how you modify your settings, how you see solar screens. Solar track communication setting, convert the system lines of travel, impulse, magnetic impulse, electrical impulse, sonar interference, electrical line connection setting, impulse all lines interference over travel, directing ground centers and trends over screen, adaptation of flux. Snowy graph interference. Very powerful set position. Okay? But if you look inside, it's all distorted information in pixels. They're all over the maps, all through motion. Right? So you got a line signal each pixelation graph, and you have to triangulate the box in position trifactor the fractions and set position all levels and travels. Ratios and proportions comes in position lines of travel. That's indicating 4 centers of sequence. Okay, we box in line conditions in 1 frame. Okay, and we correlate calculation to another box frame. Bigger lines in longitude, latitude. Okay, we blend it in and rotation lines are setting in sequence. Okay, and correlated calculation setting, box it in again. Triangulate force, high upper lines of latitude and location lines of grounds. So every time we block it in, we change the information system and travel calculations. Right? If fortitudes are northwest, south, and east, east, west, south, and north. That indicates the flux over 4 lines of communication, line direct centers, all through pi and generation screen locations. So with latitude operates lines of grounds, set each pi, and it colors from the same color. So we go through 12 line signals through the piece of pi. Okay? So this is how we block everything in, a triangulation factor that factors all lines into positions. Fractalization setting to your fractals of communications. Working with inside out line, outside in, position line condition setting, it sets coordinates, and longitude, latitude of streaming, it sets lines of travel. Okay? So this is how you basically put everything in position inside lines, outside communications. Okay? To the clock and centers of foundations. One position, one coloration, one pattern, one operation. And that's how the brain sees everything projection. Okay? It colors it in, all in one factor. Okay? So now it works with inside, outside, outside, inside of everything. Now it sees everything, right? Through triangulation of a pixelation vision or cortex of your theta. That process how do you see the schematics of its perimeter and set design. So that's how it brings it together. That's how it sees to the brain of alignment. That's how it sees to the body alignment. That's how it sees to the soul alignment. And that's what you have to modify through to know how the brain sees from everything outside and inside of you, and how everything sees you and how you see everything else. A balance in the center operation of the setting. This helps you to get really in position locations, how you understand what you're looking at all through travel. Okay? Very powerful. Okay? All right, so you guys got 1 minute line. Take out of the equation back line and rotation lines to calculate ground centers, rendezvous and interference locations. Time frame your formats, rewind time. Film strips over 3 centers over travel. 3 indicates 3 centers, 3 calculate line ground centers, location lines 3 over 4. Travels point lines of graph, into position lines of geo frame, F frame, G frame, correlations frame, center frame. Operation line sequence, plotted the operation line ground centers, put the operation units, and location of time frame the activators, back and frequency lines of center operations, and 144 flux. You're back where you are right now. Okay? So you're no longer looking outside, you're looking exactly where you are, where you left off in your coordinates. A time frame, a format, and algorithm location of cycle. Okay? Done. So, a lot to be discussed. Okay? In DQ. All right? Adios.